Final speaker of the conference before we go into our annual general meeting is actually no stranger to the National Association of Career Colleges. I'm told he's presented many times before. And he always comes with the important topic that's always on everybody's minds. What's happening with the Canada Student Loan Program? And it's always, really, it's the bread and butter of what we do. If we have the student loans, the students are coming. If we don't have the student loans, we've got an issue and that stuff. So it's pleased to introduce you to, once again, the Director General of the Canada Student Loan Program, Atiq Rahman. Atiq, welcome to the podium.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you very much. Thanks for re-inviting me. I was with you. I don't know if it was the same building or not. I was with you last year as well, had a good time, and very pleased that you decided to re-invite me. I really like coming here and talking to our stakeholders. You are a very important stakeholder for the Canada Student Loans Program. Every year, more than 50,000 of your students are receiving supports from student loans program. So I think it's important that we have an ongoing conversation. We interact with each other so that you know what's happening with the student loans program, so that we know what your preoccupations are, what your views and thoughts are, so that you can share your concerns with us. And we had a very good conversation with Dennis last week. He came by. Thank you for coming and meeting with us. And that's exactly the kind of conversation we want to keep having. I mentioned to Dennis last week as well that we would be very happy to just go and visit a few campuses now and then, just to build that relationship and keep the conversation going. So thanks for that. Before I get into my presentation, I just got the last few minutes of Dr. Walker's talk and how the landscape is changing. And there is the traditional student, and many of them are going to universities and public colleges. And then there is this whole shifting to new model of learning and new model of delivering training and education. And I think you will play a very important and critical part in that. And us being a government program, not always very flexible. It takes government programs to make changes and to adapt to what's happening out there. So, but if we don't hear from you, we will never know what those changes are and what kind of advice we should be providing to our minister and to the government. So all of that is to say that let's keep this conversation going. Really very important for us. Okay, so don't have the clicker, that's okay. So what I'm going to talk about, if we could go to the next slide, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the overview of the program. Most of you know. But we'll spend a little bit of time on the numbers, the trends that we see, spend quite a bit of time on program changes, what's going on with the program, and finally, not finally, in the middle really, some of the findings from a survey that we had of private career college students recently. So I have about 30 to 40 minutes probably, should be enough. And then please do stop me if you have questions. Let's make this a conversation than a monologue if we can. So if we could go to the next one. Very quickly, established in 1964, very long time, but what we do is provide student loans and grants to post-secondary students. We also have a smaller one, it's called Canada Apprentice Loan. It's for apprentices in Red Seal trades. And those borrowers who have financial difficulty in repayment, we have repayment assistance plan for those borrowers. More than 600,000 students get support from Canada Student Loans Program every year. That's about 60% of all post-secondary students in the jurisdictions where CSLP operates. Quebec, Nunavut, Northwest Territory, they do not participate in the program, so that's different in the other 10 jurisdictions. 600,000 students would represent about 55 to 60% of all students. Next one, please. We have grants and we have loans. Grants are more targeted to low and middle income students, targeted to students with disabilities, targeted to students from low and middle income families who have children. And then, and grants are given first, and then if there is additional need, that's met by student loans. The next one, please. Let's go to the next one. It's need-based, so we take cost and resources into account. We come up with the calculation of a financial need a student may have, and based on that, CSLP provides 60% of a student's need. The other 40% comes from provincial student aid programs. When borrowers leave their studies, go into repayment, we have repayment assistance plan for borrowers who are having some difficulty integrating into the labor market and need some assistance during that difficult time. We have repayment assistance plans since 2009, under which borrowers are allowed to pay a lower amount, and in many cases they are not required to make any payments at all if their income is low. And so there is that. Just to talk about the numbers a little bit. This is on the left side you see grants, on the right side you see loans. The blue birds are the numbers, the orange, I think it's orange, those are the lines. They are the amount, the value. As I was saying, about 60%, 58% of post-secondary students received support in 2017-18. That's a 52% increase in 5 years. Huge, huge increase in the amount of support that students are receiving. And you know, close to 600,000 borrowers received $3.3 billion in loans, and close to 500,000 students received $1.4 billion in grants. The thing to notice is that on the left side, where you see grants, the numbers were, the value of the grants were quite flat for the first 3 years, and then you see that it has been increasing very rapidly. It's a very good news story. Students are receiving a lot more grants. On the loan side too, it's only the last year that you see it has gone up. And there were reasons for that. We started not taking into account some of students' resources, which allowed us to provide more assistance to students. So this is for CSLP overall, public institutions, you know, the universities, colleges, career colleges, all combined. If we go to the next slide, here is our support to career college students. Close to over 50,000 students received $410 million in loans, and 32,000 students received $92 million in grants. This represents, you know, 9% of all CSLP support recipients. It varies between, I mean, 9 is probably on the low side. I have seen 10%, 11% of all our clients are from career colleges. Look at the grants here. Again, the first 3 years is kind of flat, and then how it has increased in the last 2 years there. The last year here is 17-18, not 18-19, so last academic year that ended in 2018. And I think on the grant side, 15-16, it was about $60 million or even less, and that has, in 2 years, that has gone to $92 million. It's a significant increase in grants to career college students. And so that's grants and loans. Here is a little bit of what we try to do is, as I was saying, that we know, we have the sense that the demographic composition of students going to universities and colleges are somewhat different. So we try to learn more about our borrowers and what their needs are. And this is from our own data. What we find out that career college students tend to be more women, 72% female versus 58% for universities and colleges. 42%, they tend to be older. 42% of career college students who are coming to us are 30 years of age or older, compared to 10% for universities and colleges. Average funding from CSLP, just the federal part, $8,700 for career college students, $7,400 for universities and colleges. And this is probably a reflection of their costs. On average, I think tuition is slightly higher for career colleges than universities and colleges combined. And that's why on an annual basis, the average funding that career college students are receiving are significantly higher. It's about $1,300 higher than university and college students. On the debt side though, again for good reasons, it's close to $11,000. It has stayed very stable for about 10, 15 plus years actually. It hasn't changed. It's about $11,000 for career college students. And for college students, it's actually lower, $10,000. And for university students, it's higher, $17,000. Again, it's understandable. University students are spending quite a bit longer in universities, so they accumulate a little more debt. College students, on the other hand, probably have lower tuition. They are also getting lower funding, so they end up with a lower debt load as well. On the repayment side, we see that compared to universities and colleges, career college students, when they do go into repayment, they tend to have slightly higher repayment difficulty. It has improved significantly over the last years, but 34% are making use of that repayment assistance plan that we have. In the first year of repayment, in that year, 2017-18, 37% of those who went into repayment, 34% of those who went into repayment used repayment assistance plan. For college students, it was 28%, same rate for university students. Not a big difference, 34 to 28, but slightly higher. And on the default rate side too, we see that it's slightly higher than public institutions, 18% versus 11 and 6 for college and universities respectively. Again, I have to mention that the default rate is high, but it has decreased a lot over the last 10 years or so. So things are going in the right direction, and we think there are still room for improvement there. But this is where we are now. Next slide, please. So I just want to give you a sense of the findings that we had from a survey that we did for private career college students. Now the question is, why did we do it? It's really, the data is very important for making good policies. And often it's very difficult to have good data. On the public side, we have this Statistics Canada database. It's called Post-Secondary Information System, PSIS. And if you link that with student loan program data and income tax data, you can get all kinds of information about borrowers and their labor market outcomes and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, that system, that Statistics Canada system, does not include career college students. So, we thought, okay, let's do a survey, see who they are, where they're coming from, how they're funding their education, what are the labor market outcomes like, so that we can complement some of the findings from the other data sources that we have for public institution students. Over 2,000 students who had received support from CSLP during 2015-16, 16-17, and 17-18 took part in the survey. The time when we did the survey, they were all in repayment. They had finished their studies. They were all in repayment at that time, so 2,000 of them. Nothing surprising, we already talked about that. They tend to be older. Many more of them are women. The other things, again, not surprising, but good to be able to quantify. 80% had prior full-time work experience. 46%, nearly half, were born outside Canada. I didn't know that, so that's a good information to have. I myself, having come from outside Canada, I know some of the challenges that folks like me face, so it's good to know who we have as our clients. 51% had prior post-secondary education, meaning that they're coming back to school for further retraining probably. And this is the new, I wouldn't say new thing, but the trend is that more and more Canadians are going back for retraining, and 51% of those we surveyed had prior post-secondary education. 53% are or had been married or had been in common law relationships. Again, nearly half, 48%, had a dependent. And almost 1/3 were coming from one of those equity groups, indigenous, visible minority, or persons with disability. So the composition is not exactly the same with university and colleges. I keep repeating that we kind of have a sense, but at least being able to quantify some of the things helps us in shaping our advice to our ministers and to the government. Now, why are they enrolling at this particular point in time? 1/3 said they wanted to enter the labor market, meaning could have been the first time that they were trying to enter the labor market. Many of them, about 1/4 of them, were in the process of changing careers, 25%. A good percentage, 64%, said they were generally satisfied with their program. You know, it's a 1 to 5 point scale, so 4 and 5, satisfied and very satisfied combined, that's about 64%. That's good to know. And 9 out of 10 had completed their program. And 53% actually said that they also want to keep pursuing further education. How are they financing their education? Well, again, none of this is surprising. It's a combination of government loans, grants, employment earnings, and other sources, family resources too. 54% of borrowers in repayment experience difficulty repaying their loan. So it's slightly higher. Now, the only thing I would mention here is that when we surveyed the borrowers, they were not very long in repayment, 2015, 16, 16, 17, 17, 18, that's the time they went to school. And it's not surprising that at the beginning, when they're trying to integrate, they're trying to get into the labor market, that is when they really struggle more. So because they're all in early part of their labor market experience, it's not surprising that a significantly high number experiencing difficulty. Do they know about this repayment assistance plan? The awareness has been increasing, 63% seem to know. We would like that number to be 100% so that everyone who is entitled can access that benefit. And common reported reasons for repayment difficulty: could not find a job, 26%, had other financial commitments, 24%, and the salary was not high enough. Again, about 1/4 salary was not high enough. At the time of the survey, 77% were working after their studies. That's good. And 26% of them were working at one job. The average salary at that point was about $38,000, $37,600. Over half of the respondents described their current job as being related to their career college program of study. That's a good thing, that the training that they received, they were working in that same field. So 56%, that's a good thing, I think. But by field, of course, there are variations, and there are variations for. I work in the public service. I never studied public service. So, so it's never a necessary criteria that people need to work in their, in the domain of their training. And then we saw some variations in the experiences for individuals in employment equity groups as well. Visible minority respondents tend to have education funding and labor market outcomes similar to overall respondents. On the other hand, indigenous and those with disabilities seem to have slightly more difficulty. I want to spend a little bit of time on some of the changes that have been taking place in the program. The slides here go all the way back, I say. It's 2016, not that long time ago. But 2016, student loans program has been a student loans program for the longest time, 1964. It's really 2008-9 when the shape of the program started changing significantly. Canada Student Grants program was introduced. Canada Student Grants were introduced for the first time. Repayment assistance plan was introduced for the first time. Significant injection of assistance both when going to school and after graduation were introduced at that time. And then, 2016 was the next big thing. Significant increases to grants and enhancements to repayment assistance plan. One point I should be making, and at the end of the day, we are the bureaucrats, we provide advice to politicians and politicians make their decision. I have always felt very good about working in a program where irrespective of the color of the party in power, they have done a lot for this program. Grants, repayment assistance were introduced by one party. They were significantly enhanced by another party in power. So it's really not a political issue in that sense. It's really close to the heart of the politicians. And at the end of the day, as I said, we will not be making the decisions. They will be making the decisions. But we love the way the government invests in our program. So budget 2016, 50% increase to our grants, expanded eligibility for RAP. And as I was saying, we don't really count the money that you are making now any longer. So you can make money and keep it for yourself. We will not count that as resources. That's called fixed contribution. We just expect students to bring a little bit of money. Beyond that, whatever they're earning is theirs to keep. Budget 2017, again, those eligibility criteria were expanded for students with dependents. That's the criteria for grants. And keep in mind that close to 50% of your students have dependents. So that's a very good thing for them. And eligibility for part-time students were expanded as well. Skills Boot. This is also budget 2017, and our minister refers to it as Skills Boost. It's for adult learners, those who have been out of high school for at least 10 years. It's a 3-year thing that the government introduced to see what the impact is like. It's a $1,600 additional grant if they have been out of high school for 10 years. Also, grants are usually assessed based on last year's income, but in many cases, people, when they're going back to school, maybe they have lost a job. Last year, they might have made good money, and under our current system, they would not be getting a grant because they made good money last year. So the government introduced a flexibility that if someone has lost their job or if income has significantly gone down, we could use current year's income instead of previous year's income to assess the eligibility for grants. So that's the CSLP component. That Skills Boost also had EI component, employment insurance, where it's easier for those who are unemployed to receive additional funding without losing the income support part of employment insurance. So that has also become easier now. I'm not an expert of employment insurance, so I don't know much more about that. As for the top-up grant, about 65,000 students, adult learners, received about $98 million last year in the top-up. As I said, it's a 3-year thing. Government is trying it out. So government will be making a decision when it expires in 2021, whether it has worked, not worked, whether to continue, not continue, or modify. Budget 2019, last year's budget. Again, lots of things. Some of those are very expensive and very useful. Some of those are not as expensive and yet extremely useful especially for the targeted groups. Many of you may know interest rate on student loans have gone down. It's actually, today is November 8th. So since November 1st, interest rate on Canada student loans have gone down to prime. It used to be prime plus 2.5. That's the variable rate. That's what most of our borrowers use. So that's good that interest rate is much lower now on the federal student loan PERD. 6 months after they leave school, for 6 months, we call it non-repayment period, and during that time, interest used to accrue. That has stopped since November 1, since last week. Interest is no longer accruing on their loans if they are in that 6-month period after leaving school and before they go into repayment. This is very expensive. The government invested about $1.7 billion in 5 years just on those two items. Close to 1 million borrowers are benefiting from that. So there is that. And then there were a number of very targeted measures targeted to those who really, really need it, either in financial difficulty or students with disabilities. So the first one, you know, students, when they default, they end up in Canada Revenue Agency. They're the collection agency for the government of Canada. We try with our service provider for 9 months to get them back on track, but if those attempts don't work, they end up in Canada Revenue Agency. And what happens is that interest keeps accumulating, right? So the minister keeps getting letters all the time that I'm a single parent, you know, all kinds of things happen to my life. I want to get my life back on track, but there is this student loan. I want to pay it back over time, but the first thing I'm told is that $5,000 of interest that has accumulated over the last 5 years, first I have to pay it off, otherwise nothing doing. And that's not easy for those who have ended up there for one reason or another to get back on track. That's not easy. So the new measure that the government has introduced, it will come into effect in January next year, is that they no longer have to clear their interest. It can be added on top of their principal amount, and then over time they can slowly pay it off rather than having to pay that a few $1,000s of interest in one shot. They can capitalize that. So hopefully that will be very helpful for students who have ended up in collections. For those who have to withdraw from school for medical reasons or becoming parents and they have been in studies and they're taking time off, what the government has introduced is up to 18 months of temporary leave from school. Right now, what happens is that you withdraw from school, 6 months later, you go into repayment. Again, no exception. Interest will start accumulating and you will have to start paying. Under this rule that government is introducing, what will happen is that you can officially withdraw from that program. You will have to apply, but then up to 18 months, interest will not accumulate. You will not have to start repaying your student loans for medical and parental leave reasons. And a few measures for students with disabilities. Increasing the cap on Canada student grants and services. We had it $8,000 that students with disabilities can get for their services and equipment that they have to pay for. It's reimbursed based on the expenses they have. That cap has now gone to $20,000, so that will help a lot. It's not a lot of students that this measure will help, but few students who really need it will really benefit from this. We have what we call severe permanent disability benefit, which is loan will be cancelled if the disability is so severe that they can no longer ever work or go back to school. Medical assessment has to say that, basically, that disability is so severe that they will never be able to work again. and then the loan will be cancelled. That has been the rule so far. The government changed that the assessment doesn't have to say that they will no longer ever be able to work at all. If the assessment says that they will not be able to do substantially gainful employment, making a little bit of money, is okay. It's good for their psychological health too, just be able to work a little bit if they could. In those cases too, there are some measures how that would be measured, that what is substantially gainful employment, but that has already been introduced since August 2019. That's already in place. And again, for the students with disabilities who use we have a enhanced version of repayment assistance plan for those with disabilities. But the flip side of that has been that if they use repayment assistance plan for students with permanent disabilities, 5 years later, if they wanted to go back to school, they cannot access our funding any longer. There is a restriction on them, so that restriction will also be lifted starting next year. So it's a number of measures. Some of them are very broad: universal interest rate, grace period interest-free status. Every single student loan borrower will benefit from it. Some of them are low cost, very well targeted measures for those who are having serious difficulty in their lives. I'm very proud of the smaller ones. I'm proud of the bigger ones too, but these are the vulnerable Canadians who are really looking for help from the government, and those measures will help them. While we are introducing those ones, we have also been very busy on the service delivery transformation side. Many of you probably know we have been paper-based for the longest time. We are trying to catch up, trying to move into the digital world. So currently we are going through a transformation project, and some of the things that have already been introduced is students no longer have to go to the post office. Many of you know they used to have to go to the post office and show their identity and this, that, whatnot. No longer needed. They can do everything online now. Recently, we have introduced the second feature that students can track their funding, what's happening to their application, where it is, and when they can expect to get their funding. There is that. They can, of course, use their mobile phones now to access all of those things. And over the coming months, we will be introducing gradually over time the other features there: live chat, SMS text notifications, capability to upload documents without having to mail them, and some financial literacy tools that we are using. We are working with Financial Consumer Agency of Canada to develop some tools that will be available to our students on that National Student Loan Service Center portal. And finally, this is from the Liberal Party platform. So they are returning to power. Cabinet has not been formed yet. We don't know who our minister will be. So that's yet to be seen. So we know more or less as much as you know. This is what we have seen with respect to Canada Student Loans Program. These are the measures that Liberal Party included in their platform before election. And so the first one is give full and part-time students up to $12,000 more per year through increased Canada Student Grant. So looks like what they have there is it's another significant increase to student grants. Give students 2 years after graduation to get started in their career before they need to begin paying off their student loans. Right now it's 6 months. The grace period or non-repayment period that we say. It used to be interest used to accumulate, now interest no longer accumulating. And that 6 months will become 2 years. That's what they have announced, that the non-repayment period will be extended to 2 years. Change the rules so that graduates won't have to start repaying their loans until they make at least $35,000. That is the repayment assistance plan. Right now it's $25,000. It's for a single student. If the family size is larger, those thresholds go up too. So $25,000 under which nobody has to pay anything. What they have announced is that they want to make that $35,000. So if the income is lower than $35,000, no repayment required. and allow new parents to pause their student loan repayments interest-free until their youngest child reaches the age of 5. So, if you have a kid until they become 5, no interest accumulates, no repayment necessary. So those are the measures that they have announced. Of course, I can claim to know a little more than you do only because we have been looking at that and trying to analyze what it means, what the implications are, what are the implementation challenges, and so on and so forth. So, but we are looking into it. We all know that the new cabinet will be formed on November 20, I think. That's the day we will know who our new minister is. Following that, there will be briefing with the minister. We will get more information with respect to what they have in mind, what they mean by this. Some of them are fairly straightforward, but we may need further details from them. And we will also brief them on what are the challenges, how we can, whether or how we implement them on time or not, and so on and so forth. That's yet to come. We'll be very happy to come back and tell you what's going on with those implementation next time you give me an opportunity to come and talk to you. So that's more or less my presentation. I did well on time, actually. I'm getting close to time. But I have a few more minutes. Feel free to ask me any question that you may have. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. The survey was quite revealing, I thought. Our students have a significant disadvantage over students that attend public institutions when it comes to accessing financial aid for an online program. In Ontario, anyways, it's just not available. The provincial government doesn't allow it. And yet, there's significant advances in technology. When you consider the geographical size of Canada, online training is so paramount. It's so important for students to be able to access, and yet we're denied. The public institutions have had this for 15 years, and yet our students can't access that funding. So it's really unfair to the students that they're disadvantaged this way. And I know it's probably a provincial issue rather than federal, but I implore you to use whatever means necessary to get this changed, because it's just so unfair.
And thanks for that comment. Yes, you gave me the opportunity to blame them completely, but I'm not going to do that. It's a shared responsibility, really. I mean, I think what happens is that there are certain restrictions on the provincial aid part, that provincial loans and grants from Ontario are not extended to some of the career college students who are going to study outside the province and so on and so forth. But federal loans and grants, Canada student loans and grants are still extended to many of them. There are still a lot of barriers. As I was saying, as I said at the very beginning, technology changing, post-secondary landscape is changing, and we have not completely adapted to that, so point well taken. I will definitely keep that in mind when we are having that FedProp conversation with our provincial partners, but I would also urge you to keep this conversation going so that you can raise those issues with us, which will lead to us having conversation with our provincial partners and see where we can go with that.
I think it's also very revealing when you do a survey like this, if you compare it to the community colleges. Because in many ways, those statistics will be different. And especially the female percentage is, I would imagine it's quite higher for us. So once again, you have maybe a single mom.
Exactly.
She can't leave her kids to come to school, but she could take it online if funding was available.
No, absolutely, agree. And yeah, program parameters are quite restrictive now in many ways. There is a need to adapt to the changes that is taking place, for sure. We'll take that under advisement, for sure. Yes?
I think you did a great job in the presentation, and just a comment for the data, when you show the default rate, it would also be good to look at the total dollar value, because when you look at 18 versus 8%, right, it tells a story of one's worse than the other when the dollar value is much greater on the 8 side. So.
Agreed, yes.
So just make sure those conversations happen internally as well.
Okay, thanks for that. No, for sure.
Also, anything on part-time? You didn't speak about the part-time CSL. Is there any changes coming? Is that still an active?
So, yes, so changes, part-time, there was just one bullet there that part-time grants and loans have gone up significantly as well. Over the last 3 years, part-time has exploded actually in some ways, the way our part-time loans and grants are going up. And again, it's part of this shifting landscape that more and more Canadians are pursuing part-time studies. We had this chat last time that we had our conversation with our stakeholders yesterday. Unfortunately, we didn't know that there would be a conflict with this meeting. Next time, we'll try to be more careful not to schedule that at the same time. So we talked about that actually. We spent the whole day talking about part-time programs and how we need to change ourselves to address the needs of the part-time learners. It's there at the top of our mind. As I said, we do the background work. The decision is at the end of the day made by the government. I don't influence those decisions, but what I try to make sure that I have done all the groundwork that is necessary so that when there is an opportunity, here is the evidence minister, this is what you could potentially do, and then see where things go. Thank you. Okay.